I'm Warren Sharp, and hopefully this has become your new favorite sports betting podcast. This week, we've got our panel of experts lined up to give you best bets in the NFL and in college football. We're going to be talking sides, totals, and props. We're going to be talking referees and much more. And we're going to cover a few different topics. First of all, we're going to be talking about some strategies to use in the Bowl Pick'em contest. We're also going to be talking about some of the college football playoffs and futures that you can bet there. In addition, we're going to pivot to the NFL, and we're going to be covering the Chargers at the Chiefs, the Packers at the Broncos, the Cardinals at the Texans, the Titans at the Niners, the Colts at the Seahawks, the Ravens at the Bengals, and much, much more, all while giving you logic and reasoning for every single pick that we share. So you don't want to miss out on anything. As a reminder, we are giving another $100 in a giveaway. Last week, Steve B was our $100 winner. He picked Omarion Hampton to score the first touchdown in the Chargers-Eagles Monday night game. This week, all you need to do is go to the comments below and enter who you think is going to score the first touchdown in the Monday Night Football game this week when the Miami Dolphins travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. Comment below, and we will pick a winner to receive $100 added to their Novig account. As a reminder, if you don't have a Novig account, make sure that you click the link in the description below and you can get on board easily and get a $100 purchase match on your first deposit. So make sure you follow those instructions and you can get on board, try to win $100. We got a great slate of games in store for you this week. It probably is the most loaded weekend of NFL this season so far because that late afternoon slate has multiple key games and a lot of games to be paying attention to, but the early slate is not to be skipped over either because we've got critical games in that early slate, including that Chiefs-Chargers that we mentioned earlier. So a lot of great football in store on Sunday. Let's get into it. All right, before we get into the Thursday night recap and discussing some of our best bets for the week, let's talk real quick about weather and the impact on games and bets and props as it relates to our best bet from last week. So as you guys know, I put a lot of work and research into these best bets, trying to make them the strongest that we can. That's why we're over 70% for 2 years running on best bets for this show. Last week, I understood that there was the potential for there to be some weather in the Jacksonville game, and we liked Brenton Strange receiving yards over. However, it was unsure exactly, it's Florida, whether or not by the time I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon, 3 full days later, Friday, Saturday, Sunday afternoon, we would actually get that weather hitting the stadium as it did. So we still talked about this on the show. I gave it out as my best bet on the show, and I gave it to my subscribers as well. Like I do all of these, I put my money in our subs' money where my mouth is when I'm talking about these best bets for you. Obviously, the weather started to look worse and worse and worse, and we are working 24/7 virtually, tracking weather and handicapping games and bets, etc. And so on Sunday morning, when it looked like that really strong band was actually going to hit the stadium and hit it for the vast majority of the game, I decided to get off that bet for subscribers. And I sent out a notice and we played the opposite side. We bet the under for the same amount that we bet on the over so that we lost nothing on that strongest bet of the week for Brenton Strange. However, some of you guys aren't subscribers. Now, you should be, but you're not. I understand that. I've got to stay with me for a second. I got an idea. But I understand that some of you were not able to get off of that bet because you didn't hear me explicitly tell you. As a result, even though our subs didn't lose anything on that, I am still going to count that as a loss on our best bet record, which I take very seriously because I'm trying to win every single one of these. Obviously, our record on the season was 10-3. Now it's 10-4. Still a great record, but I'm disappointed that that one is going to be tallied as a loss because we didn't actually lose it for subscribers. How do we resolve that for you guys? So it's a loss on our record, but what I'm doing is I'm going to give you the opportunity to get the rest of the season regular season, 4 weeks of the NFL season for the price of just 1 week. If you want to get on board with us, because there is going to be weather that's going to be coming up inevitably on some of these games, not just the best bet, some of Rich's props, and a lot of the other things that we do for subscribers. We are focused on weather. We are making adjustments. We're betting certain games on Sunday as a result of weather. We might not be getting off of anything. We might be placing new wagers because of situations where weather is coming up. Weather is going to be a major factor down the stretch. Call this like a weather package if you want to. Totally up to you. You buy 1 week, you get the rest of the season for free. Details over at sharp.football. Go to sharp.football. You can get more information there. But definitely factor in whether you join this package or decide not to. Weather is a major factor, and you need to be accounting for it. Sometimes you can't always account for it when you place those first wagers. You have to keep checking the weather, checking forecasts all the way up through Sunday morning. Make adjustments as you need to, because weather seems like it's going to be a big theme as we close out these final 4 weeks of the season. All right, now let's dive into the Thursday night recap. This game was insane. We had the Atlanta Falcons losing by 14 points in the fourth quarter to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, storm back, win the game in regulation, no less. And they win the game despite trying to do the 2-point conversion down 14. So they scored a touchdown to be down by 1 touchdown plus the extra point. They tried to go for 2 to cut the deficit to 6. They failed to get the 2-point conversion. So now they're down by 8 points. They score another touchdown, and they try to do the 2-point conversion again to at least get it back to a tie game, and they fail again. So now they're down by 2 points. So despite them trying the go for 2 after you score to cut it after 14-point deficit, they failed that both times. They still win the game in regulation. And all you really need to know about how badly the Bucs blew this game, they're not only up 28-14 in the fourth quarter, they had the Atlanta Falcons in a 3rd and 28, which I just realized that is hilarious. Falcons 3-28. Remember the Super Bowl 28-3? I don't know. That just dawned on me. Sorry to bring back some old memories, but maybe that erases them temporarily. I know this isn't nearly as big of a game, but 3rd and 28 on the last drive, the Atlanta Falcons convert. Then the Bucs also, and we'll talk about this later, had a 125-yard to 25-yard penalty advantage in this game, and they still lost in regulation. We've got some stats here on the win probability that we'll get to in a minute, but there were a number of times that things could have gone the Bucs' way where the game would have basically been over. One of them that stands out to me was with 5 minutes left, I believe it was Darnell Mooney catches the ball, goes over the middle of the field, the ball's ripped out of his hands. And there is a still that I tweeted, the NFL X handle tweeted it as well. There's a still where there are 7 Tampa Bay Bucs players, like basically trying to jump on this one ball that's sitting in the middle of all of them. And Darnell Mooney is laying on the ground, like not near the ball, in no position to recover it, nor did he recover it. And he is the only Atlanta Falcon in this zoomed out picture. And yet the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do not recover that. An offensive lineman runs from out of nowhere, jumps in, and somehow recovers the fumble. It sets up a 1st and goal from the 10-yard line. And 3 plays later, the Atlanta Falcons score the touchdown. That's what cut the deficit from 28-20 to 28-26. Obviously, they missed the 2-point conversion, as I mentioned before. Another play, Kirk Cousins dropping back in the pocket. The ball is stripped out of his hands. He's not paying attention. This is when they're driving for the field goal. It looked like the game was going to be over there. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers looked like they had the football, but the referees said that it was simultaneous possession, which is something that I rarely hear, especially at that stage. But from the replays, I think the refs actually got this one right. From the replays, especially the ground view angle from the end zone, it definitely looked like Kirk Cousins dropped to the ground and was like laying right on top of the football. Maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers players reached in, grabbed it at the same time, pulled it out. They ultimately emerged with the ball, but by the time the refs got there, it looked like both Kirk and somebody else had the ball. But Kirk obviously was immediately like trying to get the guys back on the ball. I want to say this was about a minute and a half left in regulation. What also had to hurt about this game, and just insanity, was the Bucs for the first time this year had their full complement of receivers. I mean, we know that this team was beat up at the receiver position. Chris Godwin was there. Mike Evans was back. Emeka Ibuka was there. And Jalen McMillan played his first game of the year. I mean, they had wide receiver 1 through 4. You know who the leading wide receiver was for the Atlanta Falcons? A guy named David Sills, who had this horrible, like, he tried to hands catch the deep bomb down the sideline instead of just doing what 99.9% of receivers do when the ball's coming over their shoulder, just reach their hands out and catch it like you're, catching anything pretty much. He's trying to like backwards hand it, running down the sideline on a wide open bomb. There was nobody near him. It was a walk-in touchdown. He drops it. That's David Sills, the leading wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. You had Darnell Mooney, who I believe had only 35 yards in the entire game, a complete ghost in this game. Instead, it was the Kyle Pitts show. Kyle Pitts took over this game. Looking at the stats, he had 166 yards and 3 touchdowns. Those were both career highs, coming out of absolute left field with this performance. Of course, Kirk Cousins delivering a ridiculous performance as well. He had 373 yards and, of course, those 3 passing touchdowns to Kyle Pitts. Just completely unexpected and refreshing performances. It's actually fun. I mean, sometimes we all get, crotchety or making jokes about Kirk Cousins or what's going on with Kyle Pitts, like these types of things. I'll be the first to say I've said those things, but I am more than happy to see great performances from players in big games. And although this wasn't a big game for their season, it was a big game for them personally and professionally to stand up and deliver. Kyle Pitts is going into a free agent year, Kirk Cousins as well. Like, these are opportunities for these guys to show up on a big stage and perform. And that's what so many of these NFL players have the rest of the season. We are going to see a lot of games where one team has nothing to play for. The New Orleans Saints is going up against the Carolina Panthers is one game in this very division that matters big time now that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lost. That's a perfect example of that, where the New Orleans Saints can just show up and play free, but play spoiler and play focused and care and put on a good performance and try to win a game. Or you could have teams come up with their quarterbacks or their players, their key players, defense, offense, just don't show up, just mail it in, look like bums, and perform poorly. And then maybe teams will remember that when they're looking to pay them in the offseason, or maybe teams won't. But in either case, it is refreshing to see guys step up and play really well despite not needing to, because there's nothing technically to play for. The Atlanta Falcons win probability was 4.8%, down 28-14. 4.8% when they were trailing 28-14 prior to their comeback win with about 13 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They had so many penalties in this game, 19 penalties, that they lost 48% win probability just off of the penalties alone. Just off of the penalties alone. Insane. They are the last team to win a game with at least 16 penalties called on them since the 2016 Raiders. That's how long ago that was. We're talking about basically a decade. The last time a team was able to win a game like this. So maybe some of us will remember this in the future, that crazy Thursday night game where Kyle Pitts went off and Kirk Cousins went off. And then after the game, Todd Bowles literally went off in the press conference. He dropped 7 F-bombs plus a number of other expletives to showcase his frustration. At the end of the day, this is his responsibility. This is his team. I'll say a couple of quick other stats here. Kirk Cousins. These are some pretty funny stats considering some of the narratives of Kirk Cousins unable to play in primetime and whatnot. But Kirk might find himself getting another, 6-figure, 7-figure, fully guaranteed deal, potentially 8-figure, if all he did was play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. because over the last 2 years against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Kirk Cousins is 3-0, 9.0 yards per attempt versus everybody else. He's only averaging 7.1 yards per attempt in all of those games. He's 6-10 in those 16 games versus everybody else. 3-0 versus the Bucs. 9 yards per attempt versus the Bucs. 7.1 versus everyone else. 73% completions versus the Bucs. 64% versus everybody else. 386 passing yards per game versus the Bucs. 198 versus everyone else. That is insane. Nearly 200 yards more against Tampa Bay than everybody else. 11 touchdowns to 1 interception versus the Bucs. 13 touchdowns and 18 interceptions versus everybody else. So, like I said, if Kirk leaves the NFC South and goes somewhere else, I mean, probably not going to perform that well. But if he can keep going up against Todd Bowles' defense, he'll be a Hall of Famer in no time. Kirk has also played a lot better in prime time. If you remember, it was always like a narrative like he needs to play at 1 o'clock, otherwise he's kind of turned into a pumpkin. In prime time, over the last 2 years, he's 4-1, averaging 8.3 yards per attempt, 293 passing yards, 11 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. In daytime games, 5 wins, 9 losses. That's .357 win percentage. 7.1 yards per attempt, only 200 yards per game, 13 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. So significantly worse when he is playing in daytime. So maybe he's closer to a vampire now, and he can't come out in the daylight. I'm not sure what's going on. He's aging in reverse. I'm not quite sure. Here's the last note. We tweeted this out. This was part of Rich's worksheet preview that previewed this game, but Tampa Bay was 0-5 against the spread in their 5 games leading into this one. That was the worst current streak in the NFL. Obviously, now it's 0-6, continues to be the worst current streak in the NFL. Offensively, they had gained leading into this game over the last 5, 10 yards a play, just 16% of their offensive plays, worst in the NFL. 57% of their offensive plays led to third down. That was third worst in the NFL. So this offense, yes, the defense was obviously a problem. What I didn't understand about the defense is how you don't make those adjustments for Kyle Pitts. Like, you see that the Atlanta Falcons have nobody at receiver to beat you. Darnell Mooney's doing nothing. You don't need to shut down Darnell Mooney. He's doing nothing. You don't need to cover David Sills. The guy's going to drop passes. Like, we don't need to be covering David Sills that closely. We need to somehow figure out a way to take Kyle Pitts out of this game. And yet Todd Bowles never makes any types of adjustments to take Kyle Pitts out of the game. That was puzzling and bizarre to me. It's the in-game adjustments. Okay, you might be not elite against tight ends, but how are you going to figure out a way to take away a tight end who is destroying you when nobody else is really doing very much of anything? Bijan Robinson, obviously a stud. It's going to be difficult to stop him. And Bijan Robinson going up against this secondary as a receiver in that role, in this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, is the worst in the NFL against running backs in their passing game. And they showed that tonight. What did Bijan have? 82 yards receiving on 8 receptions. So, I mean, this pass defense is a problem, and that's supposed to be Todd Bowles' specialty. But blame goes to the offensive side of the ball as well. With Baker Mayfield, all those receivers coming back, this team still is not performing on that side of the football. Makes things very interesting now for the Carolina Panthers, who were written off by a lot of people after a month and a half of the season. Now this Carolina Panthers team is on the verge of potentially winning the division. So craziness in the NFC South is going to be interesting to see how that division ultimately plays out. Still a long ways to go. Still several games to be played. A lot of meaningful action in the NFC South, but at least for once it felt like Thursday night football was a fun game. I will make my producer happy a little bit by saying this last statement. I don't know. I just have to say, going back and watching in real time, the field goal go through to win the game was the most anticlimactic announcement of that occurrence by Al Michaels. just talking about, oh, he sneaks it through the upright and there's pandemonium on the field, deadpan delivery. Soon this experiment will be over for the 2025 season. We'll see what the future holds. As far as this referee crew goes, a lot of people talking about that on X. I posted the stats, so did a lot of other people. We had the Atlanta Falcons. I mentioned that 125 penalty yards against them, 19 penalties. They were the road team. The home team, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had only 4 penalties called against them for 25 yards. So 125 to 25, 19 to 4. Carl Cheffers, he's the ref. He is a home cooking type ref. He typically calls things more favorably for home teams. The way that you can remember it, if you're a mnemonic learner like I am, or somebody who remembers, Carl Cheffers, like a chef, home cooking. The chef is home cooking. So that's how I remember. Anytime I hear Carl Cheffers, if he's on the game, I'm thinking, okay, things might go a little bit better for this home team. Despite all those penalties, it still didn't result in a win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that's where all the yardage comes into play. I mentioned all the win percentage that was reduced or removed from Tampa Bay. But if you look at the yardage, I mean, Atlanta massively outplayed Tampa Bay. Atlanta had 7.2 yards per play to only 5.5 for Tampa Bay. Atlanta had 476 yards of offense. Tampa Bay had only 338. I mean, if those penalties were not part of the game, this game would have been a bigger, more convincing win for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, obviously the game would be played out a little bit differently, and then maybe Tampa Bay's the ones trying to come from behind, and maybe they do have success in doing that. But Atlanta would have had a lead in this game as opposed to be down by a score of 28 to 14, because they completely, from a yardage perspective, yards per play, etc., were the superior team. So the penalties definitely helped the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Almost enabled them to pull it out here, but not quite. So that's Thursday Night Football. That's going to set up an outstanding weekend. Specifically, you got the Army-Navy game. That's going to be fun. We're going to talk bowl games and college football playoff preview with Ryan McCrystal momentarily. But this Sunday slate is setting up to be an outstanding slate of games. We have five games at 425. And not only are some of these games going to be tremendous, I'm trying to look at the schedule here. We've got the Lions Rams, which we're going to be talking about momentarily. We've got the Packers Broncos. So those two are like playoff caliber games with two teams that need it for seeding, that are both going to be in the playoffs, or in Detroit's case, they hope they'll be in the playoffs. Right now, they're the outside looking in, but they're playoff caliber teams going head to head. But the other game that's going to be really fun, which I'll talk about momentarily, is the Seahawks Colts game, because we might be seeing Phillip Rivers get some snaps, start for the Indianapolis Colts. So we're going to have a lot of eyeballs on that one as well. So that 425 slate is packed, but the 1 o'clock slate is still great, because we've got the Chiefs Chargers game is thrown in there at the 1 o'clock slate as well. So then you got the Ravens and Bengals. So there's a couple of really good games in the 1 o'clock slate as well. Great weekend of football. Let's start breaking down the games. Last week was my most profitable week of the season. A $100 bettor won over $1,600 following all of my NFL recommendations. We have just 4 weeks left in the regular season, and I don't want you to miss out on a great finish to a great year. Since we're coming off such a strong week, I'm feeling generous. I want to give you a huge discount to join us for the rest of the season. Right now, you can get 3 weeks of access for free when you pay for the price of just 1 week. That's right, 1 week, and then get 3 free. Go to sharp.football, click the link in the description to claim this offer before it expires. This discount will take 75% off the rest of the season NFL package, giving you access through the end of the year for just $25 per week. My betting recommendations have led to profitable weeks for clients in 12 out of 14 weeks so far this season. You're not going to get a better opportunity to get on board. So go to sharp.football and click the top link to join us today. At his press conference on Wednesday, Joe Burrow became very reflective and sometimes dark, discussing his playing career and what the injury has meant to him and his future as a quarterback in the NFL. Some of his quotes included, "It doesn't change his desire to win, but if he wants to keep doing this, he needs to be having fun. He's been through a lot. If it's not fun, what am I doing it for?" There's a lot of things going on in my personal life and with football right now. Look, this in part is the fault of the Cincinnati Bengals and that organization having let Joe Burrow down. I talked about this stat on the podcast that we did earlier this week. I'll share it again right now because this is a crazy statistic. The Bengals have now lost 3 games where their offense scored 34 plus points. One of those was just a week ago. 3 games where they scored 34 plus points. When you're scoring that total of points, you shouldn't really be losing games very frequently. They've lost their 3rd game already, and we still have 4 weeks to go in the season. This has only happened one other time over the last 2 decades. The last 20 years, this only happened one other time. You know when that happened? It was last year. You know who it happened to? Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. His team is the only team that is scoring points offensively, but they're still losing games. And that's an organizational failure with their ability to properly balance the cap, build a defense, build an offensive line to support Joe Burrow. And as a result, I mentioned this before, he's constantly having to be perfect. And even if he's perfect, he sometimes is losing games. Most other quarterbacks don't have to play quite as perfect as Joe Burrow in order to win games. I do think 2 things. Number one, it goes overlooked how excellent Joe Burrow's career has been because he doesn't have that postseason success. Number 2, I think it's difficult for a player like Joe Burrow to have that burden of carrying his team and needing to be perfect. And oh, by the way, playing behind such a terrible offensive line where you're losing games and you need to be throwing the football all 4 quarters in order to win, you're setting yourself up to take a lot of hits. You're taking yourself to take a lot of damage like other quarterbacks aren't. When you're up by 17 points in the 4th quarter, you could just turn around and hand the ball off to your running back and relax a little bit as a quarterback, or get pulled out of the game as a quarterback. Watch from the sidelines as your backup is able to hand the football off because your defense is solid, your run game is decent, and you can ice out games. A lot of quarterbacks are able to do that. Joe Burrow is not necessarily one of those quarterbacks. And so they're going up against the Baltimore Ravens this week. Baltimore is a road favorite. And I think Joe Burrow is just seeing the game last week. I also shared about his ridiculous performance. I mean, he was insane. Josh Allen was a quarterback who was throwing the football only 4.6 air yards per attempt. We're talking about underneath, dinking and dunking down the field. Joe Burrow is averaging 9.1 air yards per attempt last week, over double the depth of target for Joe Burrow than Josh Allen. He's trying to do a lot, builds a lead. This team still loses it. Now, again, he wasn't perfect. He does throw an interception, but everybody's in a different spot in their life. You don't necessarily know what everybody's going through. And we have to appreciate some of these guys while we've got them. Joe Burrow certainly deserves that appreciation. He's been an outstanding quarterback who doesn't get the recognition because the team doesn't necessarily have as much success. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think those comments are going to factor at all into his performance. He is such a grinder. He is such a dog that he's going to get out there on Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens to try to win that game as a home underdog. It's going to be fun to watch them play in the cold, but certainly he's not having any fun whatsoever, nor are Cincinnati Bengals fans having to watch this. And that front office and that ownership better figure it out this offseason. One of the most fascinating games this weekend is in the late slate. And while there are a couple of really important competitive games in that late slate, all of our eyes are also going to be glued to seeing if Philip Rivers is going to start for the Indianapolis Colts at 44 years old after years of not playing football and take on the Seattle Seahawks. And look, I don't know what Philip Rivers has in the tank, but I'm certainly going to be paying attention and watching how he performs. We've seen some older quarterbacks play till later in life. Most of those quarterbacks, though, aren't taking the time away from football as Philip Rivers is, spending time with his family, coaching football, but not actually playing football. So I don't know if he's going to start as of the time that we're recording this or not. But I also don't think that Phillip Rivers certainly is the answer. I loved watching Phillip Rivers play. Loved his competitive nature and watching him go out there, talk his trash, try to back it up. He was one of the old school gunslingers. So I'm going to enjoy seeing what he's still got left in the tank and see if there's any miracles of modern medicine that have kept his arm and his conditioning to a level that he's going to be able to last all 60 minutes. Because that's one of the things I think a lot of people aren't discussing as it relates to him. Most of the people are talking about, like, can he take a hit? Is his arm good enough? I'm also worried about, like, is this guy going to be running the slowdown offense by the time we get to the second quarter? Not the hurry up, forget that. The slowdown offense where they're taking all 40 seconds of the play clock because he's got to catch his breath. I mean, I just don't know if he's in anything close to game shape or not. He certainly doesn't necessarily look like he is from some of the videos that we're watching, from some of his practices, etc. It's going to be a challenge to see what he does here on Sunday afternoon. But one thing I expect, you got to lean on Jonathan Taylor. You can't convince Phillip Rivers to come back and actually start Phillip Rivers in a game like this and not massively lean on Jonathan Taylor to try to help carry the workload, even if your team is losing this game. I think that would be a big mistake from Shane Steichen if they go out and ask Phillip Rivers to try to throw the football 40 times because they're big underdogs. They're probably going to be losing this game to the Seattle Seahawks, a brutal defense. Let Phillip Rivers ease himself into this thing a little bit. Don't expect Phillip Rivers to come out here and play like he's in prime condition and being able to throw the football all over the field. Regardless, I can't wait to see what happens. Earlier this year, you already got my opinions about Jayden Daniels and why I thought it was on the coaching staff to protect the player from himself when he went up against the Seattle Seahawks. That was a game where Jayden Daniels was pressured more in that game than he was at any point in his career. And as a result, he was scrambling more in that game than he was at any point in his career. And it's one thing to have to deal with that once in a while in games, understood. It's one thing for that to be the case in the first half of a game. When you have a losing record and you are under pressure like that, and we're talking about it is the fourth quarter of this game and you're losing 37-3, there is no need to put your prized possession in harm's way that frequently with that much pressure and that much scrambling where he's taking all these hits in open field for what? There's no upside at that point in time. Jayden's not going to ask to come out. That's on the head coach, Dan Quinn, to pull him out. They don't do that, not until Jayden Daniels injures his elbow and boom, now Jayden Daniels is out for several weeks. Then they decide to bring Jayden Daniels back. The season is lost. And I understand you can't sit Jayden Daniels forever. But my issue with this is that I don't know for certain that Jayden Daniels was 100% perfect to come back. Like 100% healed. Are those muscles in his arms surrounding that joint back to full strength? Or is he coming back because he's good enough to come back and he's going to be able to get cleared, but he's not perfect? Because guess what? His first game back, he can't even finish it because he re-injures it. And the last thing the Commanders need is for their quarterback from year 2 to year 3 in that offseason to be rehabbing an injury as opposed to being looking ahead to building on something and taking all the draft picks that they got that are a little bit better because the team lost too many games and saying, what can we learn from a bad season last year? That's the direction I would hope that the Washington Commanders go. But for whatever reason, they were trying to prepare Jayden Daniels to play again this week with their coach, Dan Quinn, saying, well, he could have gone back in if we needed him to go back in. Finally, somebody stepped in, I think, and told Dan Quinn, we're not going to play Jayden Daniels this upcoming week. And so Jayden Daniels is not playing in New York in the cold on that bad, keep in mind, that bad turf that they have up in New York, because this is a meaningless game for the Commanders. There's no need to put Jayden Daniels in harm's way here. Again, if he's 100%, his muscles there's no sign of atrophy. They're as strong as they were before. Yes, you play Jayden Daniels to give him reps, to get him work. You don't just sit him to keep him safe in bubble wrap. but I don't think that he was 100% when they did decide to play him last week. And I think they can't let him get out on the field until he actually is 100%. And we'll see if that's week 16 or if it's sometime later. But this is priority number one, is making sure Jayden Daniels finishes week 18 healthy. All right, next up, let's talk about the LA Chargers and Justin Herbert. Speaking of a quarterback who is injured, Justin Herbert playing through this left hand injury definitely didn't look right against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, he did enough offensively to win the game, thanks in part to Jalen Hurts turning the ball over on what seemed to be at least half the Philadelphia Eagles' possessions. That certainly doesn't hurt matters for Justin Herbert. This is going to be a very different situation, though, heading into Arrowhead in a game where the Chiefs' playoff hopes are on life support. Justin Herbert clearly could not handle the football. Every time he was getting taken to the ground, he was trying to cradle it with one arm, and half the time it felt like it was getting knocked out. Some of the times his team recovered it. Some of the times that was a fumble lost. This is a dangerous situation. It's way different to be able to nurse an injury like that and play with one hand in California inside of a dome than it is in 20 degrees in Kansas City outside on that field. So I'm really curious to see how well he's going to perform here, how much pressure he gets heated up with. We saw at times Steve Spagnuolo send 5-6 blitzers at CJ Stroud last week to try to heat them up, to get them to punt the ball and give it back to his offense, which was struggling. Will we see a lot of blitzing? What will it look like for Justin Herbert? These are all massive questions that I have. But the other question that I have is, what's the upside of this offense going to look like? We know Justin Herbert has had some success against Steve Spagnuolo passing the football, but he is playing behind an offensive line that's completely beat up right now, that is beat up ahead of time, that we certainly know Steve Spagnuolo is well aware of. And without Joe Alt, the last 3 games where this offensive line has fallen even into more ruin, we have seen Justin Herbert throw for 81 yards in a loss versus the Jaguars, for 151 yards in a win over the Raiders, and for 129 yards in a win over the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if they're losing this game, he's going to have to throw the ball more. But that's going to be a challenge just against a good overall defense, a Steve Spagnuolo-led defense. When you're literally playing with one arm tied behind your back, it's going to be interesting to watch at 1 p.m. Eastern time how Justin Herbert tries to deal with playing behind a bad offensive line against Steve Spagnuolo's defense. But this also is must-see TV. All right, when we look at the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously they're not going up against Geno Smith. They're going up against Kenny Pickett, former Pittsburgh Steeler, then turned former Philadelphia Eagle, Kenny Pickett. So they know Kenny Pickett well in Philadelphia, and they know his strengths and his weaknesses. Most of all, we know that the Las Vegas Raiders are not likely to score very many points. The odds seem to indicate that. My question here, though, is on the other side of the football, and that's with regard to Jalen Hurts. Recently, reporting has come out that Jalen Hurts suggested that he doesn't wish to run the football nearly as much. Now, that was something that is being reported behind the scenes. He never came out publicly and said anything, but when he was asked about it publicly, he didn't confirm nor deny that he had talked to the coaching staff and asked to run the football less frequently. The reporter who was quoted in a story that I was reading, I think it was on Pro Football Talk, was suggesting that it was because he wanted to stay healthier and he felt like running with the football would cause him to be injured more. And certainly we've seen that in his gameplay. But that is, although he won't admit it, and I'm not sure what the team's opinion is of it, because it's a very sensitive matter, I am sure, talking about something like that publicly. This is a factor in the Philadelphia Eagles not having as much success in 2025. There is a massive upside of efficiency that's gained when a quarterback drops back to pass the football and turns it into a run play. You are averaging 8.5 yards when you are running with the football on a designed pass play through an open run lane, whether it's off to the side or it's between your offensive linemen. If there's an opening and you choose to take it, the average gain is 8.5 yards. That is better than the average pass attempt. That is almost double the average rush attempt. And so those plays are extremely, extremely valuable. And those were plays that Jalen Hurts was utilizing earlier on in his career in Philadelphia that made him the dangerous dual threat that he was. There are also designed run elements that certainly raise the upside even further. Now, I can understand cutting back on a couple of designed runs if you want to, but on some of the scramble opportunities that certainly were presenting themselves last week against the Chargers, Jalen Hurts just simply was not willing to take those. And if the Eagles want to reach a Super Bowl again, in my opinion, they need to have Jalen Hurts running the football to do it. Now, this game against the Las Vegas Raiders is extremely interesting because of the style of defense that the Raiders play. They play zone. They don't really allow a lot of rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks. If I have some of the stats here, I can look at what quarterbacks rushing versus the Las Vegas Raiders have done recently. Bo Nix, 15 yards. The week before that, Justin Herbert, only 8 yards. And we know how much Justin Herbert can run with the football. Dak Prescott only did kneel downs, basically. He had -4 yards. Bo Nix, the week before that, -2 yards. Obviously, some of those were kneel downs, but there was no positive rushing yardage. Trevor Lawrence ran the football 9 times against these guys, totaled only 24 yards rushing. And the week before that, Patrick Mahomes, who's very adept at picking holes and figuring out when he needs to run the football and not run it, 28 yards. Now, granted, they were won in a blowout, so maybe that's not the biggest factor. But Caleb Williams, the week before that, 8 rushing attempts, only 13 yards. This is a defense that's very good against quarterbacks because when you play zone, your eyes are always on the backfield. The Raiders play zone at some of the highest rates in the NFL. They're going to be able to diagnose when Jalen Hurts might be running and go after him to try to minimize those gains. Whereas if you're playing a man-heavy defense where all those DBs have their backs turned running with the receivers in a pattern, you have opportunities as a quarterback to get more yards. Now, the Chargers play a lot of zone, so he didn't have as many opportunities to have bigger gains last week. But when the opportunities present himself, I wish there was a tracker, and if Next Gen had this would be fun to see how much of the yardage that Jalen Hurts was running around behind the line of scrimmage and then ultimately down the field, how much was he running laterally parallel to the line of scrimmage versus actually going down the field to gain yards? It certainly felt like he was running sideways far more often than he was actually gaining yardage down the field. So if he's not running, I'm not so sure that they're going to have success long-term this postseason. In one of the biggest crown jewels of this Sunday's slate is the Rams versus Lions game at 4:25 Eastern time. Not only is this a rematch of a trade that occurred where the Jared Goff led Rams traded him to the Lions in exchange for Matthew Stafford, and that's why Matthew Stafford is the quarterback now for the Rams. But we've seen 2 rematches the last 2 years. One week 1 of 2024, one in the playoffs of the 2023 season, and both games were won by the Detroit Lions. Both games were held in Detroit. This is the Rams' opportunity to get back on track. And one of the key aspects that I want you to pay attention to is the ability for the Rams to have success down the field in chunks. And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to some of our prop segments and bet segments, but Matthew Stafford throwing the football down the field against this defense. Let me go over a couple of factors here. Explosive plays and red zone defense for the Detroit Lions. Number 1, the Detroit Lions are allowing opposing quarterbacks to average 3.04 seconds to throw the football. That is the number 1 longest in the NFL. That's because their pass rush isn't getting there. Allowing long time to throw is therefore allowing quarterbacks to push the ball deeper down the field against this defense. And sure enough, 36% of throws versus the Lions have the quarterback uses 3+ seconds to throw the football. That is second highest in the NFL. They allow 10.2 air yards per attempt, which is the number one worst in the NFL. And 45% of attempts travel 10 plus yards against this Lions defense, which is also number one worst in the NFL. On those passes that are being thrown down the field, the Lions are allowing the number 27th EPA per attempt, the number 24th success rate, the number 24th yards per pass attempt. The Rams throw the football often down the field. The Rams utilize some of the highest rates of play action in the NFL and under center average of the NFL. And the Lions are terrible against under center passes and play action passes specifically. This is a very bad matchup for the Detroit Lions defense, not to mention the fact that their defense has sustained massive cluster injuries in the secondary recently, especially last week losing Brian Branch to a torn Achilles, who's now obviously out for the rest of the season. It was a big factor in their pass defense. He was a queen on the chessboard. You can move him around anywhere that you wanted to. That's what they were doing to try to erase some of the other absences that they had in the secondary. Now they're not going to have him either. He was a Pro Bowler last year, obviously a key component to this defense. Sean McVay is going to have a scab that he's going to be able to pick and just bring it wide open very quickly, because there's lots of scabs on this defense in the secondary with the personnel that they have and those cluster injuries. If they don't score on those big plays, they will get down into the red zone on those big plays. And in the red zone, the Lions defense has been very poor so far this season. The Lions allow 61% of red zone trips to score touchdowns. That ranks 23rd in the NFL. They allow 80% of goal to go trips to score touchdowns, which ranks 25th in the NFL. And on a per play basis, they allow plus 0.1 EPA per play in red zone plays. That ranks 26th in the NFL. So with all of these factors that favor Stafford having time to throw, Stafford being able to throw the ball deeper down the field successfully, and this Lions defense being bad inside of the red zone, it's going to be incumbent on Jared Goff on the other side to get this offense on track and having success and find weaknesses of this Los Angeles Rams defense, which there are some, to keep his team in this game highly competitive. This is going to be one of the more fun and entertaining games of the 2025 season. I can't wait to watch this one. Let's get on to the picks. All right, now joining us is our college football betting expert, Ryan McCrystal. And Ryan is going to be talking to us a little bit about some strategies as it relates to bowl pick'em, as well as talking to us a little bit about the college football playoffs. So these are two totally separate things. There is a little bit of overlap at some points, but we're going to be walking through these. And what I highly recommend that you do is check out a standalone video that Ryan and Ray recorded on deep dive into bowl pick'em, all things bowl pick'em, everything that you need to know about bowl pick'em strategies and things of that nature. But Ryan, if I were to ask you just to distill it down into a couple of minutes, what are some of the key things that people need to remember before they go into some of these bowl pick'em contests? What are some of the pieces of advice that you can bestow upon them? And also keep in mind, guys, that not only is there a standalone video on our YouTube channel where Ryan is talking about this, he also wrote a detailed article up at sharpfootballanalysis.com where it talks about some of these strategies and gives you his personal answers, his picks for bowl pick'em. So you can lean on some of Ryan's insight. You can look at what some of his picks are. You can go your own way. You can do whatever you want to do. But that article is up there over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So Ryan, give us a little bit of a primer on bowl pick'em in general and some strategies you think people should take.
Yeah, so sort of the general overview of what Ray and I talked about that in that other podcast is there's really two key strategy points that you want to consider when you're filling out your bowl pools. The first is you got to look at the size of your pool. If you're in a pretty small pool with just like 10 friends, don't put too much thought into strategy. Just pick the teams that you think are going to win. But if you're in a bigger pool, like in a big NCAA tournament pool, you got to find a way to differentiate yourself and pick some strategic upsets. Now, the way that I recommend going about doing that is pick the least known teams in the field who have at least some chance to win. Because especially in the big pools where you have a lot of people participating who are more casual college football fans, they're much more likely to pick the teams that they're familiar with, either that they've seen before or just teams that they're familiar with watching every year in bowl season. A great example exists in this year's field because we have Louisiana playing against Delaware. Delaware's in their first year in FBS. Most people have literally never seen Delaware play a football game. They might not even be aware that Delaware has a football program until they're going to fill out their pool. Whereas Louisiana, they're in the bowls every single year. They're a perennial bowl team. You probably haven't watched them play this season. You might not know who their quarterback is or anything like that. But people are inclined to just pick Louisiana because, oh, well, they're in the bowls every year and they're playing a team I've never heard of before. So the picks are overwhelmingly coming in on Louisiana. You get the spread in that game is only 3. Delaware is absolutely capable of winning that game, and almost nobody's picking them just because of the familiarity factor. There's some other ones out there that Ray and I got into more on that other podcast. If you want to, pick a different game, you'll have some other options. But that's a good way to go about trying to find an upset out there. And then the other strategy is just stay on top of it, because that article that you mentioned that I'm writing on the website, I'm updating. I've got all my picks in there right now, but it's very much subject to change because we don't know who's playing in a lot of these bowl games. We have to wait and find out who's going to opt out. So I sort of put my picks out there at the beginning, but then they're going to change once we find out, team X is missing 12 guys or whatnot. It's going to change. So just stay on top of it. Stay on top of your picks. Pay attention. Check out my article because I'll be on top of it too and give updated picks. Sometimes day of, I might even switch a pick if we find out last minute that a starting quarterback's out or something like that. So just pick a couple upsets if you're in a big pool and stay on top of it are really the 2 main points that I would say start with.
Okay, excellent. And most of these good bowl pick'em contests allow you to do the same thing that you're doing, which is make your picks along the way. You don't have to finalize everything day one. The other thing to keep in mind, guys, is that there's a very good chance we might be running a playoff pick'em contest for the college football playoffs. So stay tuned for that. We'll give more information as it develops if we're able to pull that off. But some people have been asking about these types of contests, and we might be able to do something for you guys in that regard. Okay, now let's pivot to those college football playoffs, Ryan. And, right now they're a little ways away. Obviously the lines are out, but let's talk about futures as it relates to college football playoffs. At this point in time, is there any futures that you would be looking at to place for somebody who didn't place anything for teams to win the national championship earlier on this summer or during the season and might be looking to get involved in the futures market right now? What would your advice be for those individuals?
Yeah, so there really aren't any lines that I love all that much. There's just not a ton of value because the field kind of set up the way we expected it to. A lot of money's been bet on it already. There's just not a great value out there, but it's worth talking about because obviously, people want to get involved, especially casual fans want to put a little something down just to generate some rooting interest. So it's worth having a conversation about it in case you are one of those people that just wants to throw a little something on it just to, make it more interesting for yourself. I think you got to kind of go chalk is probably the safest way to approach this. Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, they're the 3 favorites, and it's hard to see anybody else winning it. I would stick with those. Ohio State and Indiana, they're the 2 clear-cut favorites with pretty similar odds. Nobody else can match them in terms of how well-rounded they are. They have great quarterback play, great defenses. I think you could make a strong argument that those 2 teams have the 2 best quarterbacks in the country and the 2 best defenses in the country. And there's a pretty good chance that they meet up for a rematch in the national championship game. So betting on one of those teams absolutely makes sense. Georgia, slightly longer odds, but very much in the mix. They would get to face Ohio State in the semifinals if they met up, and then potentially facing Indiana in the final. So they would have a slightly harder path because they would have to go through both of the favorites to get there, which explains why they have longer odds. But from a talent perspective, I think they're close enough to Ohio State or Indiana that you could see them doing it. If Ohio State and Indiana are getting like A+ performance from quarterback and defense, Georgia's probably getting A- performance from both of those. And I don't think there's any other team in the field where you can say that they're getting that level of performance from those 2 key factors. So I think you kind of got to go chalk is probably the safest way to do it. And I will mention, I'm not necessarily recommending this because I don't know that the value is really there, but you could place equal units on all 3 of those teams and come out with a profit if any one of those 3 teams wins. If you wanted to approach it that way, it's an option. I would say there's probably an 85% chance that one of those 3 teams is the champion. Everybody else, it's hard to see a path just because of the path that they would have to go through to the bracket. So another something to consider if you just want to give yourself some rooting odds. Like I said, I don't love the value in any of those, but if you're out there looking for a bet to place for fun to increase your rooting interest in the playoffs, those are some options for you.
It would be fun and interesting if we did see a rematch of Ohio State and Indiana,
Oh, yeah.
because there certainly was that aspect of Ohio State just defeated Michigan, got that weight off their shoulders, don't really care about this game because they had success in the past and now they just want to go win another national championship. Indiana comes in, takes advantage of that. And then you got Ohio State. If they lost that rematch to Indiana, that would be hilarious to see in the college football playoff. So, okay, last question. If you did have to pick a dark horse, I know it's not your strategy. I know it's not necessarily the thing that you think would stand up the best, just simply because of the way that you believe the playoff bracket is going to break. But if there was a dark horse out there who has a shot, who would you put your money on?
Yeah, so if one of those three teams doesn't win the championship, I think there's only three others that could plausibly do it: Oregon, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. Now, the issue with Oregon is the defenses that they're going to have to run through in their side of the bracket. And we've seen them struggle a little bit with defenses. Obviously, Indiana shut them down pretty well. Iowa played them really tough in that game. The final game of the year, Washington, which has a really strong defense, especially a strong run defense, kind of shut down Oregon's offense, limited what they can do. And if Oregon were to go through the championship, they're going to have to face Texas Tech. They're going to have to face probably Indiana, and then probably Ohio State or Georgia in the national championship. So they might have to run through the three best defenses in the country on their way to the national championship, given how they've performed against the best defenses they have faced. Even a team like Iowa, which is a good defense, but certainly not a great defense. I have my doubts that Oregon's capable of pulling that off. Then there's Texas Tech, which they definitely have a great defense, but there's two problems with them. Number one, the offense isn't great. They can't finish drives. They don't have great quarterback play. Baron Morton type quarterbacks usually don't win championships. So that kind of partially eliminates them there. The other question I have with Texas Tech is I don't know for sure that their defense is as good as we've seen. They've only played one team that can really throw the ball, and that was Arizona State, and Sam Levitt threw for 300 yards and beat them. So the other good games that they've played were against BYU, who has Bear Bachmeier, a running quarterback who can't throw downfield, and Utah, who has Devin Dampier, a running quarterback who can't throw downfield. So their best wins were against teams whose strengths really played into the strength of the Texas Tech defense. They spent a ton of money on their defensive front, and they can dominate against the run. But they spent less money on the secondary, and Arizona State showed if you have a good quarterback, you can throw downfield. And they're going to have to go through potentially their run through the championship could go through Oregon's Dante Moore, Indiana's Fernando Mendoza, and Ohio State's Julian Sain. I don't like Texas Tech's chances of getting through that stretch. So that leaves Texas A&M. Now they have a harder run because they play in the first round. It's going to be more challenging. They're going to have to get past Miami just to get through the first round, which Miami has a very strong defense. So I don't feel great about it, but the odds are much longer. You can get 20-1 odds on this. So I think if you want to go for a long shot team, this is the way to do it, because the reason why they're such a long shot basically all comes down to how they played against Texas in their season finale. They were cruising along and were going to be one of the favorites if they beat Texas. But that game kind of had unique scenarios. Number one, it was on the road, and Texas was fighting for their playoff lives. They had to win that game to even sniff the playoff conversation, which, if things broke differently in that final week, maybe they could have entered the playoff conversation. So they entered that game taking it very seriously, whereas Texas A&M was already a lock to get a playoff, a lock to get a home game in the playoff. It didn't have quite the same stakes for them. They're now going to play Miami at home, and then if they win that game, they go to play Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl just 3 hours down the road in Dallas. So playing Ohio State is not going to be easy. They're going to probably be a touchdown underdog in that game. But in terms of the best place to play Ohio State in the playoffs, that the scenario played out perfectly for them. And they're going to have fans there who travel very easily to that game. So if they were to pull off an upset in that game, I don't think anyone should be too shocked given the circumstances of that game. And from there, that changes everything. If Ohio State's knocked out of the field, they would have a plausible chance to run from there. So if you wanted to place a long shot bet, I think because you get those 20-1 odds, there's enough value there that you could justify rolling the dice with Texas A&M.
All right, very good. Well, everybody, you can get this in-depth analysis from Ryan on all of his strategies for the college football bowl pick'em and playoff pick'em over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. I'm staring right at the article here. You can find it over at Sharp Football Analysis. It's called College Bowl Game Predictions, Picks, Analysis for every game. Make sure that you guys go and check that out. Ryan, outstanding information as usual. We'll be back with Ryan throughout bowl season. getting some of his best bets for the upcoming games. Obviously, bowl season starts a little bit slower. We wanted to give you guys a primer on what to expect and some of the things for futures market this week. We'll be back with actual game picks in the future. But Ryan, great stuff as always. We'll talk to you again soon. As I've mentioned many times on this show this season, we've partnered with Novig, America's #1 sports prediction market, to give you an exclusive opportunity to try out their platform. They're offered in many states that sportsbooks are not allowed, including Texas, Florida, Georgia, and more. And right now you can get a purchase match of up to $100 with code WARREN. Just click the Novig link in the description of the show below to get your $100 match when you open a new account. And don't forget, comment below who you think will score the first touchdown in the Dolphins versus Steelers Monday Night Football game for a chance to win an extra $100. Now joining me is our fantasy football guru and loyal member of the Sharp Prop Squad, Rich Hribar. You can find all of Rich's outstanding analysis over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, breaking down every single game, every single key matchup, giving out DFS picks and advice and information. And obviously, as you guys know, he does live chats every single game day at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time for all of our members. You can come in and ask him any questions. So if you are in your fantasy playoffs and you want to ask Rich some questions about some of the last minute things, feel free to come on board. There's still time. We've got a great buy one, get 3 free rest of the season for just the price of 1 week. So make sure that you take advantage of that. Rich, we're going to walk through 3 different props, some of your favorite props of the week, at least as of right now in the week. There'll be more that will emerge later, and we'll give those out to subs throughout the course of the rest of the weekend. But on our show, we always get your 3 best as of the time of recording. And we've got a theme this week. It's receiving yardage. We got some receivers who we think are going to have some success on Sunday. And first up, Nico Collins playing in the Dome in Houston, where he does have much better splits. His numbers right now are 73.5 if you shop over at DK. Let me zoom in here a little bit so we'll make this a little bit easier on everybody watching from home. 73.5 over at DK. There's some 76.5. You don't want to go over there. So make sure you're using the OddsJam screen to find the best number before you go and bet it. What do you like about Nico Collins in his matchup against the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, he's gone over 75 yards in 5 of his past 6 games. Over that span, he has 27% of the team targets, wide receiver 11 in the NFL, 40% of the air yards, also wide receiver 11, 2.66 yards per route run is the wide receiver 4 in the NFL. We like this environment a lot. Houston is a home favorite. They have their highest implied team total of the season against an Arizona defense that is banged up, limping to the finish line over the past 5 weeks. Arizona is 30th in completion rate allowed. They allowed the highest yards per pass attempt in the NFL and a league high touchdown rate, which doesn't pertain to our bet. But hey, if you got Nico Collins in fantasy, good chance he can score a touchdown too. They've also allowed 15.2 yards per catch to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks, 140 receiving yards per game to the position. And they also are playing a lot of cover 3, cover 4, over 50% of their snaps. Nico Collins averages over 2.6 yards per run against those coverages over that span we've seen allow. You know, big games, obviously, Puka Nacua got him for 167 last week. Jackson Smith and Jigba a couple weeks prior to that got them for 93 yards. So like Nico Collins here in this spot to stay hot. This is one too you could probably even, you know, tease up if you can get something big to get to those like 80, 90, 100s.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great look. Next up, we've got Jackson Dart's outside target, Darius Slayton. And right now, his numbers, you can find them at 34.5. Those are some of the best numbers. There is a couple 35s out there, but you want to go 34.5. Going up against this ridiculously bad secondary of the Washington Commanders. And the only real concern about this one, potentially could have packed this entire game. And a lot of games on the East Coast, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, is just like, what exactly are we going to get from a weather perspective? But as of right now, I don't see any situation from a weather perspective that's going to impact Slayton or the passing attack from Jackson Dart, other than it's just going to be a bit cold. But we're not talking about sub-zero temperatures like we're getting in some of the games in Chicago or Cincinnati. So this game should be bearable from that respect. What do you like about Slayton in his matchup with the Commanders?
Yeah, sometimes we like when they're a little bit lower, like the Fannin one last week in the cold, and you get those lower numbers.
That was great.
And this one's 34.5 yards in a lot of spots. And in Darius Slayton's 3 games that he's finished with Jackson Dart, he's blown past this number in all of them, 62, 89, 41 yards. A lot of people don't know this because they've had so many rotation of injuries this year. But with Jackson Dart and Darius Slayton on the field together for 153 routes with Wan'Dale Robinson, he has 170 more receiving yards than Wan'Dale Robinson this year, only 2 fewer targets than Wan'Dale Robinson. He averages 15.5 air yards per target with Jackson Dart. Right before the bye in week 13, he was back to full strength. He ran a route on 90% of the dropbacks, and they're getting a more favorable matchup in this game against the Commanders, who are 28th in yards per target to wide receivers, and they're 26th in receiving yards allowed per game. This is one where you look at a longest catch, getting there in just 1 to 2 targets potentially in this game. You don't even need the full run out, but I think there's a lot more meat on the bone here too for another one that has potential for you to ladder up to some fun numbers, to 40, 50, 60 yards, something like that.
Yeah, a little bit of a smaller ladder, but still paying out potentially the same because his base is so low, and we like definitely laddering up those. The Fannin one, and they didn't even offer ladders high enough for him. I mean, he destroyed it. What do you have, like 105, 110 yards?
He had 114 yards. I kind of told you, stop at 50. I was like, stop at 50. What are you going to get from Shedeur?
You can't give the subs up to the peak, but damn, we would have just everybody could have just paid for all their holiday gifts in that one prop. Last but not least, we've got Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. Brock Purdy back. We got off of a bye, a little bit of time to rest up, figure out their offense. They're going up against the Tennessee Titans, who were a feisty underdog, surprised some people last week by upsetting the aforementioned Cleveland Browns with Harold Fannin. And Jauan Jennings' number right now is lined at 46.5 with a couple of 47s out there. So you can definitely grab 46.5. What specifically about this matchup has you leaning towards Jauan Jennings to go over 46.5?
Yeah, this one's kind of right around where he's been averaging, but since week 7, he is at least 22% of team targets in every single game. What I like here is that this actually sets up to be kind of a passing game for the 49ers. I know when you look at them being huge home favorites, you would say, wow, is this a spot where they're going to just, kind of grind Christian McCaffrey? But the Tennessee Titans have low-key turned into a little bit of a pass funnel. Since week 9, they allow they're second in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per game. They've allowed the fewest yards per carry to running backs since week 9. And teams have just started to attack their secondary, which has been depleted over the course of the season. Remember, this is a team that lost L'Jarius Sneed, and they've traded 2 cornerbacks during the course of the season. So they're finishing out the season with all these backup cornerbacks. It's like you see Shedeur Sanders throw for 360 yards against them, and the ghost of Jerry Jeudy catching a 60-yard touchdown against them. Wide receivers have absolutely flooded the Titans recently over that stretch. Tennessee is allowing 9.4 yards per target over the past 6 weeks to wide receivers. It's 30th in the NFL. Since they've lost L'Jarius Sneed, they're allowing 172 receiving yards per game to wide receivers. That's 30th in the NFL. So this is a spot where you're getting one of the best, the consistent targets. Like I said, the floor has been here from target perspective. And I think the 49ers are going to throw the football more here. So I like Jauan Jennings too. Another one of these potential ones where you're not going to go crazy, but you can go 50, 60, 70 yards, I think, in this spot here.
Yeah, and of course, we know that Brock Purdy came back from his injury and had a few games, but now he's got the extra time off. Maybe he's feeling even better at this point in time. And I was thinking, I looked ahead on the schedule, Rich. I was like, do they have the Rams next week? Do they have the Seahawks next week? No, they've got the Indianapolis Colts, and maybe the goes to Phillip Rivers or whoever they're trotting out. That's next week. And the week after that, they got the Chicago Bears. So they don't really have anybody that they're looking forward to immediately. That's a division rival that they might need to save some, bullets in the clip to handle. They don't play the Seattle Seahawks until the final game of the season. So certainly an opportunity to get back on track here and throw the football a little bit more and get this passing attack humming as we enter the home stretch for the San Francisco 49ers to try to make a playoff push. So with that being said, we got 3 receivers, 3 overs. We got some ladder opportunities. Would you look to ladder Jauan Johnson as well? Is that pretty standard?
What's funny is Jauan Johnson almost actually made the cut too. His receiving prop. So that's another one to look at. Jauan Jennings potentially. Like I said,
yes.
No, but the funny is he was on the short list too as well.
He was on my short list too. I was getting him.
That's why you were thinking it. That's why you're thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Jennings,
I think
you like the ladder there.
Yeah, I think him, I would probably do maybe cap out at 70, but 50, 60, 70 in that range.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, that's Rich Hribar. As a reminder, you can find all of his outstanding fantasy analysis over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, where he's constantly updating everything. And as I said before, if you get on board for the rest of the season for the price of only 1 week, you will have access to Rich every single Sunday morning through the rest of the fantasy playoffs to be able to bounce some ideas or questions off of him, help set your lineups and make the final moves to try to make your playoff push. So, Rich, thanks for joining us as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, good luck, everyone.
All right, now joining us is our NFL referee expert, Joe Gibbs. You can find Joe's analysis over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, where he dissects every single referee and their trends historically, as well as highlights a couple of key games every single week, breaks them down, shares his opinion on what he thinks is going to happen based upon the referees that have been assigned to work those games. We've got a couple of big games to discuss with Joe, some massive playoff implications. So let's dive into them right away, Joe. First up, we've got the big game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the LA Chargers. The Chiefs' playoff hopes are on life support at the moment, Joe. I mean, they have to win this game. The line has been moving in their favor. If we look at the odds jam screen, we can see right now they're laying between 5.5 to 6 points, which obviously the line was better earlier, lower for the Kansas City Chiefs. The total is sitting at 41.5 pretty much across the board. And on this game, we've got Sean Hockley, son of Ed, and big game for the Hockley family. They love all the attention that they get. The interesting aspect to this game is it is a 1 o'clock kickoff. So it's an early kick, even though it's in Kansas City, which means it's an even earlier game for the LA Chargers from a body clock perspective. But what do you think Sean Hockley's being the referee in charge of this game is going to do to the outcome?
Well, it's definitely good for the under. So Hockley's career divisional games, 30, 15, and 1 to the under. So 67% under in his career, 3-0 under in divisional matchups in 2025. So straight off the bat, you look for a lower scoring game with him in charge. And then the points of emphasis with his crew. In raw numbers, the combination of offensive holding, false start, his crew calls the most penalties in those two categories in the NFL in 2025. So you got two offensive lines that are completely compromised via injury. We saw what the Eagles did to the Chargers on Monday night. And then you compound that with this crew who has predisposed to be calling offensive holding, false start. Those 2nd and 7s turn into 2nd and 12s, 2nd and 17s. And these offenses just aren't equipped to overcome those at any great length. So to me, it screams under. The Chargers on a short week. They were on the field for 74 plays, I think, their defense against the Eagles. So you got the short week going to Arrowhead. I wrote about this game for Sharp Football Analysis. It was Kansas City -4 on Tuesday night. And so you just mentioned it's up to -6. So I don't know if that's going to matter. I think the Chargers' ceiling offensively is around that 16-point range. I kind of see it like a 23-16 Kansas City win here. Their offense is no great shakes either, but as you said, it's a do-or-die game for them. They're at home, a little bit extra rest than the Chargers. They've done well with Hockley. The Chargers situationally is not great. I just think more of a lower scoring game, and if I had to take the side, it would be the Chiefs.
Okay, yeah. Is Hockley, does he play up that role of a villain, trying to get calls, where the crowd might boo him and he doesn't really care because it kind of brings more atmosphere to the game, so to speak? Or is he pretty even keeled as it relates to that this year or recent years?
He's not a good home field referee. So that's definitely true. Particularly in primetime games, they'll definitely play up to the camera more. We saw it last Thursday night with the Lions and the Cowboys. That's the most recent example. But in the primetime games, they get carried away. Games like this, not as much. So, we'll see what happens on Sunday. But they do focus on offensive holding, false start, special teams penalties. They rank third in special teams penalties per game, which leads to less than ideal starting field position. So you add all that up with the two compromised offensive lines. To me, this thing screams under.
Yeah, the other thing, you got, like you said, those compromised offensive lines with those emphasis towards offensive holding could be a problem for both teams. And then I always wonder, under might look good, but what happens? Justin Herbert, one-armed man, can't grip the ball. It's a lot different, Joe, you being out on the West Coast, being out in sunny California playing in a dome versus now going the very next week to Kansas City, playing in that frigid, cold, playing outdoors in that environment. I mean, that pass rush, he's going to have to do a much better job of protecting the ball, getting it out quick, figuring out something else to do. He can't be taking those hits in the pocket because it's clear he is not going to be able to hold on to that ball very well at all. Okay, next game up, another massive game. We've got two teams from either division, either conference, in fact. We've got the Denver Broncos taking on the Green Bay Packers. Right now, the odds GM screen shows that Green Bay is actually favored out in Denver by 2 to 2.5 points, depending upon where you're shopping. And the total also has some different lines depending upon where you're shopping. Some spots have 43, some spots have 42.5. So always make sure that based upon what you're looking to bet, you go and get the best number. This game is going to be officiated by Brad Rogers. What does his involvement mean to the outcome?
Okay, I got a ton of stuff on this game. I'll give you starting up with this. Broncos are 1-6 straight up, 2-5 against the spread with Brad Rogers. The most recent game was Week 2, 2023. The Broncos lost 35-33 in Denver to Washington. The game ended on a controversial no defensive pass interference penalty on a 2-point conversion from Denver. So that was the last time Rodgers did a Broncos game. The league has kept him off the Broncos games until this week. So he's back again. Packers 5-1 straight up, 4-2 against the spread with Brad Rogers, 2-0 straight up and against the spread on the road. Rodgers 7-5 to the under this season, games averaging 43 points per game. He has been a pretty good under referee the last few seasons, so keep that in mind if you're looking at the total. As far as points of emphasis, 75% of this crew's penalties are assessed by the offense and special teams. That leads the league in those two categories. The league average is about 65%, so as you can tell, they're significantly higher assessing those penalties. Rodgers' crew, 44.5% of their penalties are assessed by offensive holding and false start. That's number one in the league as far as percentage of overall penalties in those two categories. The Packers, top 5 penalized road team for offensive holding. The Broncos at home, and I wrote about this in the offseason, home field advantage. Broncos, top 3 defensive unit, generating false start and offensive holding penalties on the opposing team at Mile High Stadium. This one's interesting. This is a real contradiction. The Broncos and the Packers ranked number 1 and number 7, respectively, surrendering automatic first downs via penalty. Brad Rogers' crew co-ranked last, awarding automatic first downs via penalty. So something's got to give right there. Third down penalties. The Broncos and the Packers, top 5 penalized defenses on third downs in the NFL. Brad Rogers' crew call the fewest third down defensive penalties in the league, and by quite a wide margin over the next crew. So again, an area third down, something has to give. Rogers' crew, they rank number 1 for illegal block in the back. A couple of other things that are applied on special teams penalties more so than anything. Those are some numbers to go by. Like I said, Broncos haven't done well with him. Packers have. I lean to the under in this game, but we spoke about this before the show. It's such a low total. You have very little room for error. As far as the side goes, I honestly don't have a strong opinion. I think it could be a potential Super Bowl preview. And so I'm really just curious to watch the game and see how it plays out, see how it's officiated. If I had to, I mean, you know me, I've been bullish on Green Bay. I'd probably lean Green Bay, but if Denver won this game Sunday, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, both of these teams certainly are the upper echelon, so nothing would surprise, especially at a point spread like this. It is interesting that you mentioned those few first downs awarded by penalty by this crew, and the defenses, especially on third down, this crew doesn't award a lot of penalties on third down. You would be coaching up and reminding your secondary, feel free to be a little bit more hands-on. Feel free to grab a little bit more because this crew might not call those penalties as often on third downs. Having consulted with different coaches, these are the types of tips that you would share with them to try to have your team best prepared to have success. And then if the crew starts getting a little bit more into it and calling some of those, then you obviously have to back off a little bit. But definitely something to be aware of if we've got a big third down at a critical moment of the game and a certain pass interference or illegal contact or something like that ends up not being called. It could be because simply this crew doesn't call very many of them. So great insight on that, Joe.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see how they call it. Like you said, you play to the whistle, as Bill Belichick said. You do business as business is being done. So yeah, hold early. If they don't call it, you keep holding until they start calling it.
Absolutely. And the old Legion of Boom strategy, they're not going to throw a penalty on every single play. So you can try it to push your luck if you want to. Well, there we go. That's Joe Gibbs. Reminder, he's got all of his analysis over at sharpfootballanalysis.com in the form of a detailed article every single week. Make sure that you check that out. Good luck. Enjoy the games this weekend, Joe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Warren. Good luck.
All right, guys. We've heard a lot of great best bets from a lot of different experts in their field. But now it's my turn to give you my Novig value play of the week. And for that, we're turning to the passing yards market and teeing up a game that I teased a little bit earlier in the show. And that is Matthew Stafford passing yards. One of the most basic props that you can find out there. 270.5 is the line over at Novig right now. There's going to be variations of this number. I don't know how exactly it's going to move when we put it out there, but I like Matthew Stafford, and I am going to be laddering this prop up. And I'm doing that because I think that there's a great opportunity for Matthew Stafford to have a lot of success passing the football. So let's dig in here. When Stafford plays outdoors, he is averaging 230 passing yards per game this season. But when Stafford is playing indoors, he is averaging 274 yards per game this season, 8.1 yards per pass attempt. He's playing indoors in Los Angeles at his home stadium. For the first time, he's welcoming in the Detroit Lions for several years. He's played the Lions twice, once each of the last 2 years. Both of those games have been in Detroit. In the 3 games that he's played the Lions since he has been traded to the Rams, Matthew Stafford has thrown for 334 yards, 367 yards, and 317 yards in those games against the Detroit Lions secondary. But this isn't the regular Detroit Lions secondary. This is one of the worst secondaries in the NFL that has cluster injuries, and those cluster injuries have been coming almost on a weekly basis, and they just got a heck of a lot worse last week when the Detroit Lions lost Brian Branch, who's one of their, jokers, the queens on the chessboard that can do so much with Brian Branch. He is now out for this game with a torn Achilles. This defense is going to find a lot of problems trying to slow down Matthew Stafford in this under center, play action heavy passing attack. I've got a lot of analysis on this. I'm not going to bore you to death with all of it. Bottom line, the Lions are very bad against play action. They're very bad against under center passes. They're especially bad against anything deep down the field. They allow opposing passers 3.06 seconds time to throw per pass attempt. That's the number one longest in the NFL. And that's the reason that teams average the highest air yards per attempt against this defense, because they're not getting quick pressure enough on opposing quarterbacks. And as a result, Matthew Stafford will be able to probably have time to pass the football and pass the football deeper down the field. And we know that's where we're going to spell a lot of problems. Now, maybe the Lions decide to change it up a little bit. Are they going to try to play more zone? Because Stafford chews up man coverage, especially Puka Nacua chews up man coverage. Are they going to try to send more pressure and blitz more frequently to try to, maybe we'll get caught 1 or 2 times, but we're going to try to get Matthew Stafford off of his spot 3 or 4 other times. And so there'll be a 50-yard gain, but there's going to be a couple of, third down failures because we're going to really get after him. Maybe they heat it up more than they even average. There's a lot of different things this defense is going to try to do, but the number one thing that they're going to have to be is desperate with the way that they play defense against Stafford. And I think this is a bad matchup for McVay and Stafford to be going up against a defense like this. This is probably the first time in the podcast history, started last year, we're hitting over 70% on these, that I've actually played a regular quarterback passing yards over. Normally I'm diving deeper into a lot of other markets. And as I mentioned before, we have an opportunity this week, if you're interested, to get on board for the rest of the season for just the price of 1 week. I really like the prop board this week. And a lot of the other props that I'm going to be looking at are a little bit more niche and diving into some of the longest markets and things of that nature. But for this specific one, I think that Matthew Stafford will go over 270 passing yards. I'm going to ladder it through 300. I think it's a big passing day for the Rams, not as much a big running day. We've seen some great run days from them over the past several weeks, working in Blake Corum as well. I think they lean a little bit more into the pass, specifically early on in this game, and have a lot of success in doing so. So that's my Novig value play of the week. As a reminder, if you want to get a $100 bonus match, you can do so over at Novig. I'll give you up to $100 bonus. Just click on the link in the description below, and you can access that offer. Good luck to you guys on this one, and we'll talk to you again soon. And that'll do it for the Week 15 episode of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast, the fastest growing sports betting podcast on the planet. Make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. We'll see you again soon.
Go,